Cradle. Unable to feed her children, she clutched her empty stomach and sighed. She lay awake all night worrying about feeding them. Such were our mothers. She did not scold those little urchins who wet themselves in the middle of the night while sleeping in their mother's arms. Instead, she shivered all night in her damp clothes, then dried them while preparing breakfast in the morning. Such were our mothers. There was so much work to be done in the fields that she could not hear her children crying of hunger. They cried themselves to exhaustion, but she did not know. Some fell ill and died, leaving their parents much agony as they buried their children in the mountains. As a child, I had cotton clothes to wear, thus I did not look like a savage. However, this did not prevent my life from being primitive, as times were very hard. The country was stripped of itself after Japanese colonial rule, and soon after there was war. It was during this time that I was born. My family was in dire poverty. In fact, every family was. Every family had at least 6, 7, 8, or even 9 children. In fact, every tenant farming family did. We would go to gather wood in the mountains, where there were human bones and bullets scattered everywhere. Parents went out into the fields, leaving behind their babies at home. They cried and cried in hunger and resorted to picking up and eating chicken droppings and even their own feces. They became exhausted and slept on the bare ground in the yard. Sometimes they tumbled from the room onto the dirt floors of their houses, which in the countryside were quite high. They would tumble down onto the dirt floor and then would tumble down into the yard. But even though they took such hard falls, they never got hurt. Perhaps it was providence. After having worked all day, the mother finally returned home to suckle her baby. The sound of him gulping the milk down was like the gurgle of water going down a drain. His eyes filled with happiness, his face smudged all over with dirt. His tears finally dried as he fondled his mother's breasts. Senility was a disease that many developed with old age. Many lost their consciousness as they became older. It was a disease that was caused by frequent starvation. In fact, there were many who died of it. There were those who were sick, but were too poor to go to the hospital. They eventually passed away at home, staring at the ceiling. When I was a child, I had many friends who were pockmarked by disease. Even my older brothers had come down with smallpox. We had been too poor and could do nothing but look to the sky. They eventually died. According to the neighbors, my mother had wailed madly, beating her fists into the ground. After my brothers' departures, I was born into the world as the precious son. In my village, it was customary to give a child a humble name, for people believed that the child would then be healthy and not die. Thus, as a child, my name was Kaji, short for 강아지, meaning puppy. In fact, there were many children named Kaji in my village. The kids would make fun of my name, and so, growing up, I hated hearing it. At the age of 6, I began the chore of gathering grass for the cows and feeding them. I would feed them, then come home with a bushel of grass to make boiled cattle feed. My sister was not allowed to go to school, but I was. Sometime during when I was in the lower grades of elementary school, I was out on the hill behind my school drawing a picture when my sister called out to me, "가지!" After arriving home, I hit my sister. In first grade, my class went on a school field trip to a reservoir. It was an 8-kilometer walk to get there. Seeing as I had traveled such a long distance, my mother had come out to the road to greet me and take me home upon my return. She had my youngest sibling strapped onto her back, but still she carried me home. My mother will turn 80 next year. To her, I will always be her precious son. In fact, when I was in the 3rd grade, she bought me a little desk. I was so fond of that desk. I studied at it wherever I could. Many things occurred when I was in the 3rd grade. My older sister got married and left our home. A few days later after her marriage, my father visited her and her in-laws. My father had been working at a train station up north in Nanam when a tree fell on him. He was badly injured, but eventually recovered. However, later on his illness returned, and this led him to his death. At the time, my father's friends held me in their arms and cried endlessly. After my father had passed away, I had to act at the head of the family from a very young age. My mother fashioned a wooden A-frame carrier, or jjigae, for me to carry on my back. After school, I would come home and take that jjigae with me to work in the fields and to gather wood from the mountains. So diligent was I. During the 3 years that followed after his death, we held memorial ceremonies, or 제사, for my father. Every 1st and 15th day of the month, we would lament at his memorial altar in our house, and once a year we would slaughter a pig as an offering. With ceaseless envy, I would look upon the other kids playing out in the schoolyard. I would take off my shoes and walk barefoot in the mountains and the fields, lest my shoes become worn. The marriages of all 3 of my older sisters and the 제사 for my father left our family in needy circumstances. Indeed, I grew up with much heartache and sorrow. The poor country folk all went abroad. Without any footing, they left their homes, and so they faced many hardships. But now they are the ones who are the leaders of the world.